But the church resisted, both East and West. Resisted that. He wanted all clergy to be celibate. There is record of married bishops into the 12th century, even though we're saying that, so how many hundred years before he was trying to pass this law. And so, for us as as Orthodox in the East, we ended up succumbing to the emperor's wishes regarding bishops. So we do not currently have married bishops. We used to. Okay? In the West, no married bishops or presbyters, but still married deacons. Okay? And are you familiar with something called the Unia, the Byzantine Rite Roman Catholics? Okay. The Unia, basically some of the Jesuits, when they went outside the traditional territory, it was called the West, they said, we need you to come under the authority of Rome, but you can keep your liturgy, you can keep the churches looking like they do, the vestments, everything, including married clergy, married presbyters and deacons. So a uniate church, aside from being formally under the authority of Rome and Roman theology, in every other way, looks like an Orthodox church. You walk into a Roman Catholic church, into a Byzantine Rite Catholic church, and you would think it was an Orthodox church. The liturgy is just like an Orthodox liturgy, except they do commemorate, when they commemorate the bishop, they commemorate the Pope of Rome plus the local bishop. And so they still have, so in large parts of the Middle East and Eastern Europe, where the Unia is prevalent, they have married bishops. In America, you don't have so many of the Unia married, very, very few. But when the Episcopalian Church in the 70s had some problems, you had thousands of Episcopalian priests becoming Roman Catholic priests. And they were married, and they stayed married. Okay. So you have even America. So I took some time to discuss this because people do imagine this is a big deal. In fact, it's not a theological one. That's one that we can easily solve and say, okay, as long as we're agreed on the theology, you can do your what you think is best in terms of polity. Certainly, this was a discussion among the Orthodox, and has been through much of the 20th century, as to should we restore married bishops in the Orthodox Church. The Church of Russia, in a council in 1918, decided to restore married bishops. They never got to implement it because of the communist turmoil. But this was received by the other churches with no problem. We know that is the historical norm. In our archdiocese in 1993, the Archdiocese Convention brought this up as a resolution to, the way it was couched, was to present to the Holy Synod of the Patriarch of Antioch to consider restoring married bishops. It failed, but again on these practical levels. And it failed most
Sort of
emotionally, yes, by the plea of priest kids who got up and said, we hardly see our fathers now. If they were bishops and had to travel more, we'd never see them. Okay. So especially with dioceses being as large geographically as we have them in America, it isn't practical. And this is where a celibate clergy historically was most used for missionary work, those who travel. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What else?
There's a little point of interest in Canada. Among the Unia, there's a far greater percentage
Or married.
of married clergy
Yes.
in Canada, but not so much in the U.S. And I met them when I was up in Saskatchewan.
How about unity with the Protestants? It seems to me one of the big stumbling blocks is doctrine of sola scriptura,
Yes.
which is a direct contradiction of the Canon of St. Vincent. How did we get from the Canon of St. Vincent to the Reformers believing in sola scriptura?
Well, when you're talking about the Reformation, just to fill everybody in, so if you look at the timeline I gave you last week, you saw there was the church, then Rome separated from the rest of the churches, the body of the patriarchates, and then because of problems within the Church of Rome, which we haven't discussed for our purposes here, so, one of the big ones at that time was indulgences and purgatory. Martin Luther, who was a priest of the Roman Catholic Church, nailed to the door of the church there 95 grievances called 95 Theses. He actually wrote them out in a document, nailed to the church door. And but those were some of the, indulgences and purgatory were some of the big ones, which we also disagree with. There was some contact. As I said, even though West and East were like so far separated, there was some contact by the Lutherans with the Patriarch of Constantinople. Unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. That's a real missed opportunity. They wrote back and forth, but they just weren't understanding each other. So much history had gone by that they just didn't understand each other's terminology, not to mention language. Different issues, for example, in the West, these issues of purgatory and what was I saying?
Indulgences.
Indulgences was totally foreign in the East. We never had it. They didn't quite understand what that was. The whole discussion in the West between Rome and the Protestant Reformation centered on how salvation works. I touched upon this a couple of weeks ago. Salvation by faith alone, sola fide. Salvation by grace alone, sola gratia. Or salvation by works. So the Roman Catholic Church would come more on the works side. The Protestants say, nope, no works. Only faith, only grace. We were sort of lost in that discussion, saying, what do you mean? How can you separate the two? Faith and works, we don't have a dichotomy between them. They're the same. In fact, the problem is they were picking the different proof texts. So for example, if you look at Romans chapter 2, you'll find a verse that says, every man will be judged according to his works. So Rome picks that verse. And then the Protestant Reformers, also in chapter 2 of Romans, pick, you are saved by grace through faith. The very same chapter of the same book. Not to mention being in the same Bible, the same faith. So but the Protestant Reformation, in response to some of the excesses of Rome regarding these kinds of issues, was so keen on being anti-works, so that
Also
The,
anti-Rome,
Anti-Rome.
which included anti-tradition.
exactly, because all these things were accretions, that they considered was tradition, rather than what we were discussing as our definition of tradition, which means the whole package. That's from the beginning. So the Protestant reformers, Martin Luther himself, he wanted to throw out of the Bible the epistles of James, because James has a statement in there that says faith without works is dead. Okay, so Martin Luther called the epistle of James an epistle of straw, was his wording, just to throw it out completely, because they were so convinced that salvation is by faith alone. So sola fide. So as you say, those solas, those 5 solas of the Reformation. Sola scriptura, the Bible alone. Sola fide, sola gratia, and I can't remember the other 2. Anybody help me here? I can't remember the top of my head.
Sola Christa or Christ alone? Is that one?
I'm not sure.
Grace, Scripture, Christ.
Maybe Christ alone. Okay. Anyway, so there was, but I say there was a real missed opportunity with the reformers, because they had their grievance against Rome, and then they remembered that there's the rest of the church out there, but it did not go anywhere. And as I say, we're still working on it.
So essentially, the Protestant Reformation was a reaction to the excesses of Rome,
Yes.
which included basically forgetting about the canon of St. Vincent. They didn't even know about it by then.
What I will tell you this is, from the Orthodox perspective, Rome and the Protestants look to us like they're the same thing. They may come down on different sides of an issue, but their approach is the same, specifically because they're looking at different proof texts and are very individualistic. Whether it's in the person of the Bishop of Rome, or, as has been said, the Protestants made every person his own pope to interpret the scriptures infallibly on his own. What has been lost in the West, whether in Rome or in the Protestants, is the sense of, as you said, this being part of the whole church, which includes from the very beginning until now, not an individual understanding. Okay, I will read on my own and I will tell everybody else, or I will read it on my own and I'll start my own church. This idea of proof text rather than the whole body of tradition that has been received from the beginning. There was a 19th century Orthodox writer who described it as Rome and the Protestants are 2 sides of the same coin. So they have like different faces, but the approach to theology is the same. And certainly things that if you remember in the previous weeks, we discussed how salvation works, this whole idea of original sin. All of that is in common between Roman Catholics and Protestants. We don't have any idea of original sin. That's an error that cropped up.
The Protestants won't accept tradition. They complain about the Roman Church accepting tradition. I mean, I don't see them as being 2 sides of the same coin. I mean, maybe I'm not looking at it properly, but I always thought there was a huge gulf.
Yeah.
Between the Protestants and
right. Within the West, Roman and Protestants think they're on opposite poles. But as we, from the outside, look at it, yeah, there are opposite sides, but their way of looking at things really comes out of the same approach.
Well,
Individual little proof texts, whether you choose this verse or that verse. Is it faith alone or works alone rather than being a package, for example?
Which is rationalistic.
well, it's hard to see them operating the same way when one group says tradition is no good.
Yeah.
The other group says, well, it's a big part of our, they're miles and miles apart.
Elaine?
Just to complete that list of 5,
Yes, thank you.
Sola Christi
So, okay, Christ alone.
and Soli Deo Gloria.
Ah,
To God alone.
to God alone be the glory, yeah. Okay, well, I know we've gone over time. Okay, why don't we close, and anybody wants to stay?